Hello and welcome to the Apologetic Dog, where it's our heart's desire to contend for the gospel of grace. Thank you all for tuning in, and I just want to thank you all for your ongoing support, whether that's in prayer or you have joined the Apologetic Dog membership on YouTube. I just want to thank you so much for your monetary support, and this has been a blessing just to answer your questions and cover certain topics along with the Patreon, and perhaps even more, one of my favorite ways that you can support the Apologetic Dog YouTube channel is through Super Chats. And so if you have some of those, we will bring those questions and points that you would like for our guest. Dr. James White is in the virtual building. How are you doing, sir?
Oh, well, I'll tell you what. I wouldn't do this for most people. I mean, 5 hours on the road, absurd construction just outside of Odessa, dodging semi-tractor trailers who think they're at the Daytona Speedway in a construction zone, and they're zipping by. I mean, I literally have to move my mirrors in just to make sure they don't get blown off by these guys. So I wouldn't do this for everybody, but you're the apologetic dog, and I don't want you to be the apologetic hound dog.
That's true.
You know, so I could just see you with the sad eyes and stuff like that. So I'll have to make a graphic. I'll have to have Grok make a graphic of the sad apologetic hound dog, and I just couldn't handle that. So here we are.
Yeah. Well, hey, you're wearing a wonderful T-shirt there. Where'd you get that?
Well, I actually have two more of these waiting for me at home because I actually nuked this thing right there. Thankfully, you can't see it.
Oh,
So there's two of them waiting for me at home. They arrived the day after I left, which is how it always works. And I just didn't want to make my wife have to take a trip to the post office and send them to me. So I'll get them when I get home on Thursday. So, but yeah, I'm repping 12.5 and doing my best to get the word out there, get you all to be a mega church. Sorry, I really wouldn't wish that on anybody. Actually, can you imagine how different 12.5 would be if it was a mega church? I mean, you sort of do have to think. There's just sort of, for most people, there's sort of a maximum size before you need to go. Let's plant a church someplace.
100%. Our
Let's do
magic
something.
number is around 350, but you're 100% right.
Yeah, we can hit 7 right now, but normally we're around 400 or so, and we just have so many people coming from all over the valley that it would be hard to. But anyways, that's not what we're. So I'm in Odessa, Texas. The wind is just whipping like anything out here. I pulled into this RV park, and I'm like, yuck. I mean, everybody's backed in, and they're right next to each other, and there's no grass, and it's just dirt. And I'm like, oh. So I pull around to the office to check in, and they greeted me real nice. They were real nice to me and stuff. And the guy takes me outside and says, well, your slot's right there. There's like 4 pull-through long regular slots I'd expect at an RV park right outside the door. And that's when I realized what's going on here. All the people in this park work in the oil fields. And so they're oil field workers. And so they're getting a super deal by backing their RVs into these little spots. They're right next to people next door. There's not a lot of privacy, but that's how they do it. And it's a big park. There's a lot of people in here. So yeah, you meet, you get to visit some really interesting places when you're doing the RV life thing. It really is interesting.
Yes, well, let's transition to one of the interesting places you got to visit early April. So you're kind of winding down your trip, or do you have any more places on your trip back home?
No, I'm heading home. I
cool.
get home Thursday. That's I hit Las Cruces tomorrow, and then all the way home on Thursday, and then probably Friday, Saturday nights if I can do it, if the body will do it. We'll be out at the Easter pageant of the Mormon Church, and
Wow.
with my son-in-law, maybe some of my grandkids, and doing what we've done for many, 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 many years out there.
Yeah, and something else y'all got coming up is ReformCon. That's coming up pretty quick.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I'm not even. We're not even gonna park this thing in the storage thing or anything. We're gonna keep it in an RV park, keep plugged in, keep the fridge cold and everything else, and I'll jump back in her next the week Wednesday, week from Wednesday, head down to Tucson for ReformCon. So yep.
Sweet. We'll look forward to hopefully being able to watch some of that for those that maybe can attend in person, and then maybe a few months down the line being able to see some of those lectures. I went to ReformCon 2.5 years ago and had a blast. So definitely want people
Yeah.
to go check out
Cool.
that conference. So, Dr. White, tell us about this first debate. So, you've done a handful. I mean, you wrote on the King James only controversy. How many? Do you have any idea how many times you've debated this topic, the King James only?
Not many. Not
Hmm.
many. I remember one guy. They've almost all been online. Uh, the the one I did in London was televised, but that wasn't. Those weren't formal debates. So when you actually look at my formal debate list, there's almost nothing on King James only of them because you can't get people to do anything. It's almost always the television program, radio programs, the John Ankerberg show. Don't know if you ever saw that one, the 8-part John Ankerberg show. If you want to see what I look like with glasses and hair, I mean I think that was 1995 if I recall correctly. So that was a long time ago, but I think it's on YouTube. The whole eight part series is there. So as far as actual debates, very few. And this one, we were approached by a young man who came out and attended the Jimmy Akin debates, sort of debates in Livingston last year. And he approached the pastor of the church, Brian Gunter, and he said, I'm a part of the King James Bible Research Council. We aren't Ruckmanites. We're not Ripplingerites. We don't behave like that. We're not into the Stephen Anderson stuff and all that kind of stuff. And would you be interested in doing a debate on the King James with someone who's not going to engage in that kind of behavior? And so that's how they pursued it. They really did through this fellow. And so, once I decided I was going to be traveling in 2025, which I wasn't sure about up until the election, um, we arranged it, and so I did not know Doug Levesque, but I was able to find 3 or 4 presentations at most from him from various conferences that they had done, and so I had listened to them very carefully, and so I had some idea of how it would go,
Hmm.
but and everybody knows where I'm going to be coming from. I mean, I wrote that book in '94. It came out in '95. It's 30 years. And if you listen to the dividing line and put in King James only, you're going to get hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of stuff there. So there's no question of what my stance is going to be. Um, so I was really surprised, honestly. I mean, Doug was very self-controlled
Hmm.
and very, very glad that you don't have it wasn't like Sam Gipp when he sent me the coloring book and the crayons, type of stuff.
What?
That's the standard King James only-ish type of behavior. Um, but I was, if you listen to I honestly think the debate's going to be extremely useful
Hmm.
because, especially in the cross examination, it is so painfully clearly documented that the King James only position is completely circular. And they may say, well, you're a presuppositionalist, so you shouldn't have any problem with that. Well, no. The idea that the triune God can reveal himself propositionally in Revelation is a completely different thing than a 17th century Anglican translation of the Bible. And that's what we're debating, is the translation. We're not debating whether the Bible is sufficient. And see, in the King James only controversy, probably 20, 30 pages in the introductory material, the first chapter, something like that, I have an equation. And I said, if you want to understand the King James only mindset, here's how it works. The King James Bible alone equals the Word of God alone. That's it. Now you can scream about that. You can call people racist. You can do all sorts of things like Ruckman did. You can come up with utterly insane stuff like Ripplinger did, or you can be really nice and kind and a good brother and be orthodox on other issues. But if you're King James only, that's what you believe. The King James Bible alone equals the Word of God alone. So that's going to determine how you handle anything. And so over the years, I remember doing a radio debate with a guy, and we went to Romans 9:5, and I showed how
Yep.
Modern translations render it in a way that's very clear on the deity of Christ. The King James doesn't. So he attacked Romans 9:5. I went to Titus 2:13, did the same thing. He attacked Granville Sharp's rule. So just willingly attacked texts on the deity of Christ to substantiate the King James version. And so I've seen this happen before. And if you listen to the debate, I don't think he cited a single Bible verse until the third round. And I made reference to that in my rebuttal. I said, you may notice, I'm the only person that has gone to the text of Scripture. I'm the only one that's given examples. I'm the only one that's given a verse here. And so he gets up and he starts rattling off verses, but he doesn't. He just gives references and doesn't tell us how it's even slightly relevant. And then he spent a bunch of time talking about gegratai. It stands written. It has been written. But doesn't even try to make a connection to a 17th century Anglican translation's Bible. But that goes back to that equation, because in his mind, as long as he is talking about the inspiration of Scripture, as long as he's talking about it is written is the King James. So if there is a sure word from the Lord, it's the King James, because that's the equation. And so once we got into the cross-ex, there were just so many times it was so amazingly clear that position is indefensible on two levels. And I think everybody in the audience caught that. But the two levels, and I'm not talking about his two streams thing. From his perspective, it's believing Christians versus everybody else. And so I'm in the everybody else. And so the Legacy Standard Bible is demonic, and any reading other than the King James is demonic. And he affirmed that, even when the rendering was much clearer than what's in the King James Version of the Bible. But the two areas was in the text. So what text is being translated? What is the Textus Receptus, the foundation of the King James Version, versus a modern eclectic text or manuscripts in general? So I did use, and no one has commented on this yet. Not even you, Jeremiah. You haven't commented on this either. But I used a reference that is not in my book, and I've never used in any discussion of the King James issue before. And I need to give credit where credit is due. You know where I found the reference?
Where?
Grok.
No, your best friend.
my new research assistant named Grok. I had asked a sort of more general question, and if you use Grok, you can click on the links thing, and so I'm following the links, and so I saw a pretty relatively new article from the Text and Canon Institute, and Peter Gurry's a good guy. I mean, he's so solid, and so I clicked over to it, and that's where I found an article from a guy who has direct access to, and I think yesterday I mixed the numbers up on this because there's a 2814 and 2817. I'm going off the top of my head. I don't have it in front of me. One of them is, I think it's 2817. Yeah, is a manuscript of Paul's writings that Erasmus used. And that's where the reading fellowship in Ephesians 3:9 came from, which is not in any manuscript before that. And then, so 2814, anyways, is the one manuscript that Erasmus had of Revelation. And it was a commentary written in Greek. It's a Greek commentary by Andreas of Caesarea from around the year 600. This manuscript's not from around 600 by any stretch of imagination, but it is a Greek commentary, and Erasmus had to extract the text of Revelation out of it because it's all he could find. He borrowed it from his friend Johannes Reuchlin, who is also a fascinating fellow, really, really fascinating fellow. And it's the one that was famous because it didn't have the last page. So Erasmus had to back translate from his own Latin translation into Greek for the last few verses of Revelation, created all sorts of interesting readings that, again, had never been seen in the history of the church. And this guy is writing an article for the Text and Canon Institute, and he's providing graphics, he's providing pictures from the manuscript. And that's where I read the discussion and could read the image. It's right there from Revelation 21:24, where in trying to extract that stuff. And remember, Erasmus, if Erasmus had had his way, Revelation wouldn't be in the New Testament. He clearly had canonical questions about its worth as scripture. So he's not working all that hard, let's just be honest. But it's the last thing he's got to get done before this thing gets published. And so when extracting the Greek text of Revelation, a mistake was made. And what ended up happening is there's an entire phrase, such as are saved, such as the menon or something. I don't have my notes in front of me, so I'm just going off of the top of my head. There's a phrase that is in the TR that has never been found in any Greek manuscript of the book of Revelation, ever. And that's because Andreas of Caesarea wrote it. It's part of his commentary. And so in extracting the text, there was confusion. It's easy to see how it happened. But the TR reading, which is in the King James, came from Andreas of Caesarea, who wrote 600 years after Christ. So, I mean, this is just a glaring example. We don't want man's words. We want what God gave us. And so here is this example. And Doug really never gave a meaningful response to that example at all. He struggled. He'd keep going back to, well, there's two streams. And I'm like, that has nothing to do with it. That has absolutely nothing to do with it. You're not dealing with the issue here. These are not the words of John. They are the words of a commentator. And I should have, you know what I should have done? I don't know if you do this. Do you sort of spend a lot of time going back in your mind over the debate and going, I should have said this, I should have said that? I don't really do that. But I've thought about this one. And one of the things I could have said to him that might have helped, honestly, was that Andreas of Caesarea was anti-chiliastic. So he's against the millennium. I'm sure Doug Levesque is dispensational premillennial. And he was very much into allegorical interpretation, sort of like Origen. And so I can guarantee you Doug would not like Andreas of Caesarea's commentary on Revelation by any stretch of the imagination. So maybe that would have helped him to go, yeah, I don't think we want that guy's words actually in the text of the Bible. It's like, yeah, maybe not. So, but I didn't mention that to him.
Dr. White,
Unfortunately,
something
I
y'all
didn't.
mentioned, and I thought it was really good because you pressed him in. So before the King James translation, there was other English translations like the Geneva Bible, but some King James believe in what's called double inspiration. Like how do they
Right.
try if they're not going to own that? I think you really put Mr. Doug in a hard position to because you're like, what's so special about these writers who even told us that this is, their best work with the resources that they had available. So, what was Doug's position ultimately on that? Because I know he rejected double inspiration or tried to.
Right. And see, that's one of the things they had said to us when we set up the debate was they said, we reject Ruckmanism, hence we reject double inspirationism and stuff like that. But in the cross examination, I demonstrated no, you do believe in double inspiration because it doesn't matter what I showed you. I can show you the textual problems in Revelation 21:24, Revelation 16:5, whatever it is, and you're still going to go with King James. And you're going to say, well, the translators would have known this. And I think, no, they didn't. They're only dealing with printed text. They did not know this. They did not have this information. And then when it came to translation, he literally said the LSB's clear rendering of Acts 5:30, whom you murdered by hanging upon a tree, was demonic in comparison to the King James, whom you slew and hung on a tree. And so if you're going to say that, if you're going to go to Titus 2:13, you're going to reject the testimony to the Granville Sharp instruction and all that kind of stuff. Uh, what can I say? That requires that the King James was inspired between 1604 and 1611 because you are saying their work is absolutely perfect. It cannot be improved upon in any way, shape, or form. And he pretty much agreed that knowledge of the Greek language ended in
Yep.
1611.
Hmm.
It ended in 16 because that is their position. It doesn't matter what we've learned since then. It doesn't matter how many papyri we've discovered. It doesn't matter how our knowledge of Greek syntax or Greek vocabulary. It's irrelevant because if the King James is the standard, then everything that's happened since then has been a waste of time. And I can guarantee you, not a single one of the King James translators that they would have guffawed with laughter at the position that Dr. Levesque was presenting in this debate. There's just zero evidence they ever would have accepted anything like this at all. And so, um, yeah, they may say they don't believe in second inspiration, but the reality is you push any of these guys, and you push some of the TR only guys far enough, and they will um, demonstrate that they do believe that something special happened between 1604 and 1611 that will never happen again, and that's why it's the ultimate standard.
Well, hey, we have a clip from the debate. Would you like for me to cue that up?
Yeah. This was in the second cross examination. We could have all the cross examination, at least when I'm asking him questions, um, is extremely useful in documenting the circularity of the King James only position. But in this situation, I've already done this. I've done this textually. I've done it translationally. He hasn't been able to give a meaningful response. He's always defaulted back to, well, there's two streams, and I just before this I had said, but that has nothing to do with this. It's irrelevant. It has nothing to do with this at all. And so finally, I ask him this question, and you'll hear just this pause. There's just dead air, and you know as well as I do, dead air.
Say something at
Dead
least.
air, dead air comes from radio, and I was a radio announcer for many years in high school and early college, live. I mean, playing records and doing the news and the weather and commercials and all that kind of stuff. And dead air is, I still dream, honestly, after 40 years, more than 40 years, um, I still have nightmares of a record starting to skip and I'm in the bathroom. you know, we or it just stops and you've got dead air. That's the worst thing to happen on a radio station is dead air because everybody tunes out immediately. You're looking for something else. And so in a debate, especially when you just get asked a question, dead air is the death of your position. It just is. And that may not be fair, but this was a situation where you can even watch the people. If you watch the people in the audience from the back, from the camera angle, you can see how many are leaning over to each other, and people are shaking their heads, and people are recognizing we're only getting one side in this debate. So yeah, go ahead and play it, and we'll see what it looks like.
Irrational reasoning. You're starting with the King James, you ignore its history, you ignore its text, you make it the ultimate authority, and then when you look at any text, you just simply use whatever form of argumentation is necessary to defend that particular reading. Please answer that. Is that not true?
It might appear that that's what I'm doing.
Yeah,
it might appear.
Does.
It appears to the rational mind that's what I'm doing. But I'm saying
rational mind,
the textual, the supposed rational mind, the textual critic has found it very easily and cavalier since Westcott and Hort to have a mind that will allow them to easily say.
When did I ever quote Westcott and Hort to you? I didn't. I'm giving you specific facts, and I'm giving them to you as a minister who defends the deity of Christ around the globe on this topic. Mm-hmm. And I say to you, the LSB is stronger on the deity of Christ at John 1:18, Titus 2:13, 2 Peter 1:1, Revelation 1:8, where Jesus is called Lord and God, but not in the King James. So these are important issues. So I'm doing this as a spiritual man who believes the Word of God, and I'm saying to you, it seems that as a fellow Christian, you have a tradition that is keeping you from looking at this factual information. How do you respond to that?
I think it's two different sides of maybe the word inerrancy. I mean, I think it's inerrant. And you say
okay, yeah. And then he goes on to talking about squishy inerrancy and stuff like that.
Dr. White,
but when I asked him that question, you can't see it from that angle, which is a shame. But see, I'm remembering it in my mind's eye, and he's because he's sort of looking over toward me, and he sort of looks down, and he smiles, and he looks back, and he says, "Well, it could seem that I could see how someone could say that type of thing because it's true. That's okay. and that's the end of the debate."
So he demonizes Westcott and Hort, and I think one of your retorts to that was, hey, there are things connected with the King James and these people that you would reject equally as well. Is that kind of a good response to when they demonize Westcott and Hort?
Well, there's a couple things. Westcott and Hort weren't, the stuff that they threw out about Westcott and Hort, I responded to Ripplinger's stuff on that in the book. But I don't think it's necessarily useful in a debate to be trying to, get into the history of Westcott and Hort. Westcott was more conservative than Hort was and stuff like that. My retort at that point is pretty simple, and that is, well, Erasmus was a Roman Catholic priest. Erasmus wrote a book in defense of transubstantiation. Erasmus died in fellowship with the Roman Catholic Church. So, if you're going to try to pull the Roman card or something like that, it's obvious, for example, that Erasmus inserted entire texts from the Latin Vulgate into the Greek text that becomes the text of acceptance, and it's in the King James Version of the Bible. So, but you see, that doesn't matter to them. They don't care. The King James is the standard. If it's in the King James, then it's inspired. It's fine. It's good. It's perfect. Great. But we can go ahead and attack whoever, and it just doesn't matter. So um,
So,
yeah,
Dr.
that
White,
was
on the very practical level, like when I was doing hospice, and I would be consulting families, and I would bump into guys that were King James only, usually telling people, that there were English translations that came before it. That usually pumps the brakes and just trying to dialogue with people. And in other situations where when they just say, point to any error, I found this to be helpful, and maybe you can actually give me some advice on this. But I believe it's in Hebrews chapter 4, where the text says Jesus, but all these other translations refer to Joshua back in the Old Testament. And to me, that's really hard to reconcile, because if the standard is the English King James, then you have to go outside of the English to try to talk about the etymology of the name Joshua and how that's really the Hebrew name for Jesus and things like that. But is that a good place to point to get people to kind of slow down?
I think to be honest with you, I think you'd lose a lot of folks. There are folks that do suggest that the best way to deal with this is ease of translation. Mark Ward goes that direction, and that's fine. We don't
Okay.
all have to do it the same way. I think in a debate that would be
Sure.
really tough to. It's going to take you a long time to drag all that stuff out. Honestly, but there's lots of different directions to approach it from. But this debate is the King James Bible the best English translation? And so for me, that's going to allow you to deal with the underlying text and with the actual translation itself. And that allowed me to talk about Titus 2:13, 2 Peter 1:1, Revelation 1:8, whatever else, Revelation 14:1. There's just so many that you can go to. And that's why I think, long term, it's going to be extremely useful on that level. Now, I really hope nothing negative happens to Doug as far as his association with the King James Bible Research Council or whatever else. There was a debate last year. One of their guys debated Mark Ward, and my understanding is that after that debate, he was no longer associated with the King James Bible Research Council. So I don't want anything like that to happen. But at the same time, I really would hope that Doug would consider his position, because it was demonstrated that he's spinning in circles, and you cannot presuppositionally turn a 17th century Anglican translation into the entirety of the Word of God and then make it the standard, especially when you're talking about its textual history, its translational history. And he has to know that the position he holds, the King James translators would have just been utterly befuddled that anyone could ever come up with anything like this at all.
Dr. White, I always learn so much, especially in these kind of textual criticism debates. Never told you this, but grew up in a household where my dad gave me a New King James Bible, and he told me, I love my dad to pieces. He said this was the best one. And so for a long time, I was on the other side of this debate for no good reason other than just the little bits of, what I've looked at and comparing translations. Oh, well, the King James seems more specific with ages than, the ESV or something. And I think it was watching your debate with Bart Ehrman, and that took me down a rabbit trail, and just realizing the text tradition as a whole is how God has sovereignly preserved his word. So definitely
Right.
that has reached to my generation. And so thank you for doing these debates. Now, this was one of 2 debates on this trip. And so maybe this is a good transition to you getting to meet the Fishbone finally.
That's right. Yeah, and of course you came up as well, and I was gonna park the rig there at the Fishbone's house, but that didn't really work out so well. So, but I did pull in, and he was impressed with the size of the beast, even though he's got a pretty decent sized one he's trying to sell himself. So It's not a fifth wheel; it's a diesel pusher. But anyways, we had a good time that night. Had some gumbo, some Louisiana gumbo, and I had never had gumbo before, so I just skipped the shrimp and did the chicken and the sausage in that. And I didn't even finish one bowl, and he had four. So there's that too. But anyway, so yeah, it was cool to get to meet him and his guys there, and get to know a little bit about the church. And so yeah, that's what led to the debate, where again, like the preceding debate, I had a pretty good feeling where things were going to go, because he had done two debates before on Romans 9, one with Matt Slick and one with Turretin Fan.
Right.
And I wanted ours to be more similar to the Turretin Fan one than the Matt Slick one, because while the opening statements in both of them were very useful, it got rather heated and nasty pretty quick in the Matt Slick debate. And that really, from my perspective, detracts a lot from the final usefulness of the debate. And so, and I had felt like not only was Turretin Fan's presentation of Romans 9 very much my own, but at the same time, the questions that Turretin Fan asked of him, I thought really got to the key issues. And so it had been very useful. And of course, he'd know my view of Romans 9. He'd have my published books. He'd have, the Leighton Flowers debate, where, hey, at least one thing that has to be said straight up front is at least we got much more into the actual text of Romans 9 in this debate than we ever did in the Leighton Flowers debate. Because again, Flowers had not only his opening, but his rebuttals, his questions, and his closing already written out. So it's like, all right, it doesn't look like we're really going to be getting into the text too much here. And as everybody knows, what Leighton Flowers wants to debate is free will, total depravity, incapacity, such. That's all. I said on the dividing line, there's this text, and I didn't look it up, but in Second Chronicles somewhere it says, 2 at the par bar, 4 at the causeway, and 2 at the par bar. Okay, and at least I've got the verse memorized. And if we debated that text, he'd make it about total depravity, human ability, whatever. He could do that. Very skilled in only talking about one thing. So, at least if someone wants to dive into it. And I did do an unbelievable radio broadcast about 5 years ago, maybe, with there were some people who were saying that they had really come up with a new understanding of Romans 9 and stuff like that. And it really didn't make much sense. But so I at least I felt, and this also explains why I didn't get into some of the things I could have. If I had wanted to push some buttons, if I had wanted to push the Church of Christ stuff, the baptism stuff, the justification by faith, the faith rather than by faith stuff, I could have. But that would have been the end of the debate on Romans 9. And unfortunately for most of the people watching, what had been said on Romans 9 up to that point would have been lost, as the debate would have gone into other topics. And since it's starting much later in the debate, it's going to be very surface level. You're not going to be able to get into any depth on anything you do talk about. So I didn't go there because I felt that in the discussion of Romans 9, the back and forth initially, up to the cross-ex and through the beginning of the cross-ex, I thought something very important had already been established. And that was the connection between the golden chain and Romans 9 specifically, 20 through 24, even we whom he called. It's the same term, called. And if you recall, he struggled to try to explain the relationship. I mean, his whole argument, and I think I'm being very fair here. His whole approach is to reduce Romans 9 as much as possible. Read out of it anything that could possibly be considered to be reformed. So his statement over and over again, there's nothing uniquely Calvinistic here. There's nothing that establishes Calvinism. It's a mantra that repeats over and over again. But once you recognize the context, once you recognize that Romans 8 is what prompts this question about the Jews, and then Paul goes back to using the same language when he's explaining vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, vessels of mercy prepared for glory, even those whom he called from amongst Jews and Greeks. And it's the exact same terminology. It's the exact same language. And I think he really stumbled very badly when he tried to break the golden chain up and say, though it was very interesting to me, he interpreted foreknew as foreloved, as I would, which I found very interesting. But that's the problem. This is to enter that makes the golden chain personal. There have to be specific individuals to love, not just a general group that you get yourself into by your free will actions, you see. And so he struggled because it's those whom he predestined, he also called. And he really struggled. Well, many are called, few chosen, something
Right.
like that. I said, but there is an efficient call. This is something God does, and no matter what you do, the Greek grammar here, the language, you can't get around it. The same group who are foreknown are predestined. The same group who are predestined are called. The same group who are called are justified. The same group that are justified are glorified. There's no way around that. He tried to break that up, and he couldn't. He couldn't do it. And of course, if you're justified not by the faith, but justified by faith, then now you've got a real problem, because all who are foreknown are justified, and they're also glorified. It's because they were called. That's an efficient, effective call. And that's what you have at the end of Romans 9. So the theology hasn't changed. It's still about soteriology. That's what the focus is. And that's, he did not refute that. He tried to, go to other topics, but he did not refute that. And so that reality of Romans 9, for someone who will listen carefully, who will be looking at the text and listening to the argumentation, there's no way around it. And he didn't find a way around it. And I didn't want that to get lost with 27 different topics that, honestly, we wouldn't be able to get into in any way, in any meaningful fashion. I just didn't want to go there. So, that was, to me, that was the usefulness of it. And I will say this: the audience questions, that was a good example of why we shouldn't have them. I'd say in maybe 10 to 15% of debates, audience questions are actually helpful. Half the time I'd say 30% of the time they're neutral, and the rest of the time they actually detract from the debate. And the audience questions this time did. They were all over the place. They were on all sorts of different topics. Molinism came up and all the rest of this kind of stuff. And it's just like, really? Okay. Bummer.
So one of my observations, being the unbiased moderator that I try to be,
right?
One thing I noticed, AK is real quick to assert that you are presupposing the T in exegeting Romans 9. And, our presuppositional bells go off saying, well, of course, no one's neutral. We have different anthropologies. We have a more fundamental view that's different about who God is. And so he said a number of times, I didn't make an argument for free will. I don't have to presuppose it. And I'm thinking, AK, you have that as a tool in your tool belt. You think it's necessary, and if you're pressed on it, you in a disjunctive way say our side can't make sense of the exegesis, and so it's broken logic. That's our point about his view of man in relation to God. So anytime he points the finger at your presuppositions, I'm like, there's multiple presuppositions pointing right back at you, which is a self-refuting point. If he's going to say, well, I don't really have any presuppositions that I'm bringing to the text, I can just let it read and say, it just says what it says, which is a very Church of Christ line, if you didn't know.
Yeah, that's a Church of Christ line, but it should be pointed out that there were expressions of concern before the debate about his Church of Christ alignment and making that a big issue. And I did not try to push that. It came up once in regards to justification by faith. What about baptism? He actually brought that up.
He looked at me too. I was smiling so big.
Yeah, the reality is he effectively kept from having to present a coherent, understandable position, theology on Romans 9. Well, I don't have to do this and I don't have to do that. Well, yeah, you do, and you didn't, and that makes it hard to deal with you, but it also leaves the audience going, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to believe about this, other than however I end up interpreting it, it can't have anything to do with Calvinism. That seems to be the big thing as a takeaway there. So I think someone who watches that debate, they're going to walk away knowing what I believe the text says and how that fits into my overall theology. But I don't think they're going to have any idea. During the audience questions, he affirmed certain things that, to be honest with you, pretty much purely Pelagian.
He does not believe essence. We're born in original sin. That's one of the big things with Church of Christ theology.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. That's
he calls it the influence of sin.
Yeah. So those are vitally important issues that we didn't get into, but I think they are really, really important when you ask questions like, those whom he called, he justified. Okay, what does it mean to be justified? And if you have a very non-Pauline understanding of the imputation of the righteousness of Christ, the nature of faith, whatever else it might be, I think that's really important. I really think it is.
Do you remember when you debated Paul Barker many years ago on predestination?
Paul Barber. Paul Barber. He was if Paul Day is talking about what I think he's talking about, I did a debate with a Church of Christ minister on Long Island, probably about sometime in the late 90s. It was at North Shore Baptist Church. And, I think I may have listened to a section of it once 25 years ago. It's literally been that long. So my entire recollection of it is he, at one point, it was a small church, okay? And he was really getting wound up. AK never got nearly as wound up as this guy did. And since I was sitting sort of from an angle from the side, he had moved out to the first pew. And he's preaching, he's yelling, and I can see the spit
Oh no!
I can see it flying literally to the third and fourth rows, man. He's just spraying them, man. He is going after it big time, and that's my big recollection. If you were to ask me what were any of the points that were raised, I'd go, I don't have a clue. But yeah, I just remember him being highly animated. Highly animated. Yes.
Dr.
Yes.
White, one thing I remember you saying on is probably a different program, but to undercut the Church of Christ anthropology with saying we can't do anything pleasing to God. And I think it was my first public debate with a Church of Christ minister on baptism. I really pressed him about the unregenerate man cannot please God. And you talk about someone who had never thought about that concept from Romans 8. And anyway, I took your advice, and obviously people learn from that. And there's Leighton Flower is going to want to take you to Cornelius and Acts and so forth. But anyway, the Church of Christ. Go ahead.
But by the way, that does, and I'll forget this if I don't mention it now. You sent me the screenshot of the discussion of this debate that had A.K. Richardson and Leighton Flowers, and the guy who calls himself the Idol Killer, and I was, in a sense, I looked at that and said, well, I obviously should not have worried too much about AK's feelings. Because if you're gonna jump on with these guys, okay, well, that I was obviously way too nice. But you said that on that program, A.K. Richardson actually said that he would rather be an open theist than a Calvinist. Was that
I
what
told
you
him
said?
Yeah, and I talked to A.K. I said, dude, that hurt my heart. I was like, he said, well, I'd rather be a Calvinist than a Roman Catholic. I was like, no, don't change it. I said, you said you'd rather be an open theist. I said, look, I'm not saying I'm making an infallible judgment on someone's soul, but I just said open theism has made God in their image. It's a different God. I mean, you got to believe in the right Jesus, and you got to believe in the right gospel of grace to have your sins forgiven. I just said, I can't endorse or be charitable to someone who says that God learns as man learns. And as you said, the idol killer, the weird dynamic omniscience claim is so he can say, I believe God knows the future, but he redefines God, he redefines future, and he redefines knowledge. So the alarm bells don't go off when you hear that.
Yeah, when I first encountered him years ago, I shredded a bunch of his stuff on the dividing line until I realized I was wasting my time with him. But one of the really humorous things, and it was humorous, was he was trying to avoid identifying himself as an open theist. And so he did an interview with John Sanders. Now, my first debate on open theism was at Reformed Theological Seminary in Florida. And it was with John Sanders. And he's also an inclusivist. We had done a debate the night before on inclusivism. And then we debated more formally open theism. And it's interesting. I also debated him on Unbelievable on that. He was much, much, much more aggressive years later. And the reason was he had lost his job because he had debated me the first time.
Oh.
So... Yeah. There were people in the audience that were on the board of the school he was teaching from, and they were stunned that he believed stuff like that. So he lost his job. I said, oh, okay, that wasn't my fault. Okay, I mean, what can I say? But the point is, I'm sorry?
I was going to say, believe it or not, the first time I learned about open theism wasn't one of your debates, but so in Jonesboro, Church of Christ are everywhere, right? This is how I learned about it, is in real time, sharing the gospel, realizing we're saying all the same terminology, but we mean different things. When I'm trying to quote Ephesians 2:8-9, they're trying to quote Acts 2:38. And I eventually interacted with a Church of Christ preacher He wasn't an elder. He was a preacher. He was real insistent upon that. But he was an open theist. And I was like, tell me what that means. And I remember what he said. He goes, well, just know I'm trying to be consistent. And I just remember what he said at the very onset. And his justification was God is so sovereign that he can choose not to know certain things. And then he would say, remember, the Bible says that he remembers your sin no more. So that was my first encounter with open theism, was actually with the Church of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, Warren McGrew interviewed John Sanders, and when he gave him his little personal dynamic omniscience thing, Sanders just goes, no, that's open theism. And I was listening to it while riding the bike in the dark. I remember out in Sun City, and I just started goofing. I imagine I probably looked pretty silly riding on the road doing that. But yeah, it was like stop playing games. You're talking about open theism. You might want to try to come up with your own little thing to make it your niche stuff. But you're talking open theism, and if anyone the John Sanders debate was good. It was useful. But if you want to see the real danger of open theism, see the debate I did with that. And for some reason, his name just escapes me all the time. He's dead now, too. The open theist I debated in Denver, Colorado in 2014. He was well known because he was the John Benet Ramsey stuff. He was involved with that somehow up there. And for some reason, his name just keeps escaping me. But in that debate, you get a much better sense of just how far this stuff can really go, what it really means. Because I went to John chapter 13 and the prophetic fulfillment in regards to Judas and the betrayal of Jesus. And his position was, yeah, Judas could have not betrayed Jesus. I don't know what that means. Well, he actually went so far as to say, and Jesus could have not done what the Father wanted him to do. So he actually believed that there could be disharmony in the Godhead itself. I mean, that's just, wow. Massively dangerous stuff. Obviously, grossly unbiblical and obviously grossly heretical as well. And undercuts all messianic prophecy, the whole nine yards. It's a mess, and but as I've said many times, a consistent Arminian will become an open theist because the standard, old latent flowerish, simple foreknowledge stuff just won't hold up.
Now, you said something that rivaled your Ignatius quote from a few previous debates. So I've had Dr. White, I've had to tell people, hey, go talk to Dr. White. He qualified that Adam pre-fall was still a creature.
Yeah, so you can't. So you cannot make any statement publicly on the internet any longer where the rest of the context is provided within 15 seconds. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Did he have libertarian free will? Well, yeah. I mean, he was unfallen. He's a creature. So it's not outside the decree of God, obviously. But if all you're talking about here is the impact of the fall upon the will of man, then obviously Adam was not fallen, and we can't say anything more about Adam because we're only given 2 chapters before the fall takes place, and we're not given anything more about that. And there is a difference. I believe that Augustine was right and other people in the early church were right, that the redeemed saint has a greater position in heaven than Adam had because of the completion of the work of the Spirit of God in the sanctifying work of the individual, union with Christ, new creation. So you can get into all the hadn't sinned but possibly could sin, and all the possibility stuff that has been discussed down through the ages. But I was just simply saying, well, yeah, Adam's unfallen, but there aren't any Adams. And I guess from his perspective, yeah, there are Adams. every child is
Yeah,
born
exactly.
is a new
Yep.
Adam.
Yep.
And I'm, that's not even close to what I was saying, but he ran with it, and I kept sort of under my breath, but sometimes out loud, going, that was before the fall, and that lasted a very short period of time, and it's not really relevant anymore and I think I did say in my closing statement, none of that's relevant any longer because of the reality of the fall and in Romans chapter 5. I haven't taken the time to do it, but it would be interesting to jump onto his YouTube channel and see what he tries to do with Romans chapter 5, because man,
Oh, I can tell you what they
I
do.
don't.
So yeah, I mean, I've debated this with Church of Christ, and they make everything in
Yeah,
Romans.
but he's not necessarily
Dr. White, Dr.
Church
White,
of Christ fully.
he doesn't claim that the Church of Christ is the one true church. That's the thing. He doesn't want to be outed, because if people know that, then they're going to be like, oh, well, you've like, he thinks me and you are saved. We're just in error. That's the big thing. Now, you're right. There are some other things. The Church of Christ don't like us saying we're justified by faith alone. And they're like, oh, then that contradicts that we're saved by grace alone. You can't have two alones. He's the first to correct them of saying that's bad logic. Like, you don't understand their position. But AK has all the fundamental tenets of Church of Christ theology. And so I'm quick to tell people, if you believe that baptism is the mechanism that washes away your past sin, which is huge to Church of Christ theology, that you're justified by the faith, right? And that we are born the same way that Adam was created. I mean, that's kind of the mixture that goes all the way back to the 1800s, the Restorationist movement. So yeah, I told AK I appreciate that he's okay with me kind of letting people know that this is Church of Christ theology. No one is neutral.
Okay.
And before
I saw a question on the screen. I saw a question on the screen and it disappeared.
All right, well, somebody spammed that question, because I was going to say, Dr. White, I heard a lot of the same questions in your debate with AK that I had with AK. So we actually debated, is libertarian free will true? So we went deep into the philosophy, and I read everyone's favorite book, Guillaume Bion. People are going to have to look up that French philosopher. And I had a lot of phone calls with Eli Ayala. And so one thing that he asked me that he also brought up to you was Jonah. Jonah proves, libertarian free will, and God is big enough to get his will accomplished, which to me, that's just doing this, Dr. Wright. You see this? Just waving the hand. God's big enough to figure that out.
Yeah.
I'm like, that doesn't tell us anything.
Well,
but,
and that was the thing. That was the thing that they did with Flowers and McGrew was, can God survive trillions of free will choices? And they're just not understanding what this objection is. If they would listen to John Sanders, if they would actually read the Open Theists, they would know that to say, well, God can get what he wants. He has a way to do it. Look, if it means the violation of a human free will, Sanders is going to say, nope, can't do it. Not gonna go there. Can't do it. And if it happens at any point in time, then God's character is besmirched and the whole nine. So they're basically saying, oh, that's too extreme, and they want to say, God can do this in some, he likes to use the term. What's his favorite phrase? Based on some mysterious qualifications, or when he talks about God's will, God's good. Why does he select one and not select another? Well, it's the good pleasure of his will. And he talks about that as some mysterious thing or something like that. Well, they're the ones with the mysterious thing. They want to, on the one hand, affirm creaturely free will after the fall, and deny total depravity and deny total inability and stuff like that. But then turn around and say, yeah, God can choose to have the crucifixion take place at such and such a time. And yeah, that means there's going to have to be all these free will choices on the part of all these different people, many of whom don't even know they're a part of what God is doing in bringing about the crucifixion, like Roman soldiers and things like that. And that's perfectly fine. He can just do that. But it's like, well, wait a minute. That means they couldn't have done otherwise. They didn't have a free will in that matter. So how are you're having your cake and eating it too? It seems like, I'm the one being honest enough to say, no, our actions in time are responsible before God. They are actions that flow from our
Mm.
desires, all the rest of that stuff. But I'm living in God's world, and God's decree determines the very fabric of time. And um, so I'm willing to say, yes, this is a result of God's intentions and God's purpose. And they're going, oh, no, we can do the same thing. It's like, no, you can't.
Dr. White,
Uh,
the thing that they feel like they have a gotcha on, and I think you handled it really well. So Leighton Flowers does this too, and you mentioned it, dividing lines over the years about you can't flatten God's decree. So this is what they say. What is God being patient for? What is God restraining but his own
yes,
decree? And if anyone
yes.
studies compatibilism, we say God has a transcendent eternal will, and man has a temporal, creaturely created will, and those are compatible. In fact, we make choices and they have meaning and purpose because God is working out all things together. So, what I've pointed out, and I'd like for you to speak to this, is when we say God permits something, he restrains something, this is him entering into the human realm, and our perception is analogical. It's true. It's true for us to say, hey, God permitted that. That is compatible with God's decree. They are not mutually exclusive. So maybe that's a good point for you to address, because this is their big gotcha. What is God restraining if it's not his own decree?
Yeah, when he said, "What is he being patient with, but his own decree?" I'll have to admit, I'll just be perfectly honest with you. I found that to be one of the least compelling arguments.
That's their
And I
big
think
one in their
most
mind.
people, it may be, but hopefully people who are not already committed to that perspective will be able to go, well, wait a minute. They believe that men are responsible, and we know what Leighton Flowers does with that. All the silly linguistic stuff he tries to do with that. But we believe that men will be judged by God and judged justly on the basis of his law. And we also believe that when God interacts with us in time, God's providence is to interact in time. We are given example after example after example. Now, you don't have time in either cross examination or audience questions or whatever to go back and, I very quickly made reference to Genesis 50. I
Mm-hmm.
just have to hope that people are going to take the time to read it, maybe look it up and go, oh, yeah, well, that's interesting. Joseph had come to understand that what had happened to him and all those years of imprisonment and slavery and everything else, that God had intended that. And in fact, God had intended that in the evil action of his brothers all those years before. And that's what a lot of people are just unwilling to actually come to believe, is that level of evil. And I think one of the worst evils in that situation was the deception of their father by the brothers. I mean, can you imagine when that came out? Whoa. Yeah, all right. And that was just astonishing. So there you've got an example. I go to Isaiah chapter 10. There you have just, I mean, straight out throughout the chapter. I'm using the Assyrians. They think they're doing their thing, and they think they're doing it freely, but I'm actually using them to punish my covenant people. And when I'm done punishing my covenant people, I'm going to punish the Assyrians because of the attitude of their heart. And God says this, and I just don't know how these folks fit that stuff into their systems, because it doesn't not make any sense. And then of course you go to, you know, and I think I did briefly bring up Acts chapter 4, the prayer of the early church.
Yep.
Herod, Pontius Pilate, the Jews, the Romans, did what God's hand had decreed would take place, and yet they all did that very much freely from their perspective and their
Dr. White,
experience.
God's big enough. God's big enough to work that out.
We're just gonna have to do the big hand wave.
There you go.
Yeah, I know.
Well, Dr. White, thanks for coming on.
The twitchy theologian, yo woof woof.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you saw. Let me try to bring that back up. Do you remember the twitchy theologian, Dr. White?
Yes. I deeply impressed him with my ink. He was very. Remember?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, so okay. So you're talking about the tatted theologian. This is
right.
a gentleman.
That's right. The twitchy. That's right. That's right. And he has emailed me, twitchy theologian. I've got your email, but you need to send me another one. When I'm traveling, it's tough. He wants me to do a program with him, and I will. We'll get it done. It's just I didn't get back to everybody, so I apologize for that.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he's going to be forgiven. We do have one question before we end with Paul Day. By the way, this is one of my good friends. I've had him on, the Apologetic Dog. He was saved by God's grace out of the legalism of the Church of Christ. And so he's asking a question. So if AK is correct that that God can use his power despite libertarian free will to get what he wants, why doesn't he then use it to save all men? Would you like to comment on that, Dr. White?
Well, that's a question for AK Richardson. I mean, you would think that if the hand wave is sufficient, then he could hand wave everybody into heaven without in any way violating free will and human autonomy and all the rest of that kind of stuff. It is interesting to listen to people who reject the idea that, and the idea is right in Romans 9. What does God say? He wants to make his wrath and power known. And he did that by destroying the Egyptian army in the sea and the Pharaoh along with it. Even though in the great movie, The Ten Commandments, they couldn't kill Yul Brynner in the sea. I mean, that wouldn't have allowed for that awesome. And, I'm old enough that I remember when that first showed up on TV. And when the sea opens, I mean, okay, today we look at that and go, really? But you got to realize, before CGI, that was awesome. That was just fantastic. But remember, I think the best scene in the movie is when the Pharaoh comes back and he has his sword and he's going to strike the queen. And she says, "Show me his blood on your sword." And he drops the sword. You couldn't even kill him. And there's Yul Brynner, the Pharaoh, is sitting on his throne. And he goes, "His God is God." I mean, the theology there was so good. It was so spot on. His God is God. There you go. Anyway, you would think that, why not? Why not get everybody into heaven, get it all done, and all is good. But Romans 9 says God is demonstrating his wrath and his power, and also his mercy and his love and his grace. And if you start with that, if you start with the doctrine of God, if you start with what God's desires are, everything else will make sense. But these guys, their theology starts with man and edits God to fit their position. And that's the big difference. That's the big difference.
Yep, something I like to bring up in this is, so if we press libertarian free will into heaven, right, we would say, okay, is the fall possible to happen again like Origen postulated back in church history? Because if you now switch and do the Frank Turek route that says, well, you just won't choose it because your desire is perfect. It's like, whoa. One of the key principles of libertarian free will is your choices are not determined by your desire, because that's us. We have a glorified body, therefore we don't. We will. It's impossible for us to choose to have evil because we have a redeemed humanity. So you pick your poison. You press it out. Guillaume Bion, I want to recommend his book. I'll try to include that in the show notes because he really does do one of the best deep dives into compatibilism. I break that to tell people that God and man are not the same. We are not univocal, but we are made in the image of God. Therefore, we reflect God in his attributes. And so we know God analogically. Our choice is not sovereign. It's not all-powerful. It's a reflection of that. It's limited. It's temporal. It's analogical. So I know that's doing the razzle-dazzle a little bit, but our choices are compatible with God's choices because we are not the same.
Right. Right before we did the program, Jeff Durbin sent me a image from Leighton Flowers, and I don't know if you've seen
Oh,
this.
boy.
It
I'm excited.
is. It's yesterday. I don't follow Flowers, so but someone must send it in. You'll find this interesting. Mankind didn't need a fallen sin nature to choose to sin. So too, fallen people don't need God to miraculously give them a new nature in order for them to respond positively to his own appeals to be reconciled through the gospel.
It's the same thing in y'all's debate on John 6:44. Do you remember the audience question that just said they cannot see
Oh, yeah.
salvation as miraculous? For them, you
Right.
get the data, you do the superpower free will thing, and for the Baptist, that means you're smarter than the other person. If you're Church of Christ, you're more obedient than the other person. And I'm like, look, that gives ground for boasting. That's not the thing that we are to search after. So, yeah, it's not a surprise at this point, honestly.
No, it isn't, but it does. He does keep outing himself in really holding to the positions that we said long ago. It sounds like you and Pelagius would have gotten along pretty well. Oh, it's terrible. Semi-Pelagian. Blah, blah. Now you're saying it just straight out. I think hanging with people like Warren McGrew and stuff is going to probably eventually get him to just come straight out and quit playing with all the games. So anyway.
All right, Dr. White, thank you so much for coming on the Apologetic Dog and representing that merchandise out there.
Well, there you go. And this is the first time that they sort of bugged me a little bit. Maybe there's some changes some settings I can change. But this is the first time I've ever used the Apple pods. Yeah. I've never used them before. The only reason I got them now is I got an Apple Watch. If you've got the MacBook Pro, you've got the iPhone 16, you've got to have the watch and the rest of it because they all work together. They're just sort of designed to work together. But the hearing aid test, these things can function as a hearing aid. So I put my hearing aids away, and so I put them in, and that allowed me to hear you and do all the rest of that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it was pretty cool. But this is the first time I've done it, so I did it with the Apologetic Dog while wearing your
5,
your
baby.
t-shirt. So there you go.
Yeah, hey, I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing that lamp set up in the studio one of these days.
Yeah. Rich is doing something in the studio right now while I'm gone. He's literally going to start doing his own program. And,
Rich is?
Yep.
Okay.
He has completely covered that wall behind the control thing, and he's put lights in, and he's going to start doing something on his own. And when you think about it, how many thousands of hours of me talking has this guy listened to? A whole lot more than anybody that would go to seminary as far as the hours of lectures. He's gotten a whole lot more than that over the past 30 years. So, yeah, why not? So yeah, I'm not sure if we've gotten to the other studio and the cool lamp and stuff like that yet, but we'll get there eventually.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. White. We'll be in prayer for you in your travels home.
Yep, I'm looking forward to it. We'll see you later. God bless.
All right, see you. Bye-bye. Okay, I may hang around for a few minutes if anybody in the chat has any questions. As y'all think of some questions or want to pick my brain about anything, it's been so great to be able to get to know Dr. White. Truly been a blessing. He's been traveling to Jonesboro, coming and speaking at 12:05. And if you don't know, I was able to be his debate partner a little bit over a month ago. Me and Dr. White, we teamed up to defend limited atonement. And so that was just a blast to be able to do. Okay, let's see in the side chat. Let's see here. Okay. We'll see. I've not proofed really any of these questions, so let's give it a shot. If the cup that Christ drank before the cross was full of wrath of God for sins, then did disciples also play a role in the atonement as they drank the same cup? Hopefully this is a sincere question. So I would say they did not in any way play a part of the atonement overall. When Jesus established the Lord's Supper, I take the view that it was picturing the death that he was about to die, and so he was teaching them that he is fulfilling the old covenant. He's fulfilling the Passover lamb, and he is getting ready to establish the new covenant, which is exclusively the covenant of grace, by the way, in his own blood. So Hebrews chapter 9 talks about he inaugurated the new covenant in his blood. So them partaking with that is to the fellowship, that is to discipleship, that is in their unity with Christ and his authority. Like I said, hopefully that was a sincere question. If it was, thank you for that. Someone wants to know about Dr. White debating Stephen Wolf. Probably not going to happen. Okay, let's see here. Okay. Someone wants to know. Yeah, Leighton Flowers is wrong. Psalm 51:5 says, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me." Yeah, so we look at this as a strong verse saying, look, we're literally born in sin. And I don't know if Leighton Flowers has took the view that David was the product of his mother's sin and father's sin in adultery or something like that. I forget the passage in Deuteronomy, but that would disqualify him for being king. That don't work. And so the Church of Christ like to look at Psalm 51 as it's poetry. So it don't mean that, as the Fishbone likes to say. And I like to point out, look, the Psalms are poetic, but it's based on something real. And what's interesting is Paul, in his didactic epistles to the church, he quotes from the Psalms that say, none is good, none's righteous, no, not one. No one seeks out after God. And so this is where you get into the Pelagian controversy. Do we suppress the knowledge of God and rebel against him from birth? Or do you start out in this like neutral state, and then do you go out of the way based on external circumstances from the world? Jesus says it's from the heart that evil comes about, not the things that go into the body, the things that come at man. So, unfortunately, the more that I try to charitably understand Leighton Flowers, I'm okay with saying he is a semi-Pelagian, but I think when pressed enough, it ventures into the whole spectrum of what Pelagius taught. And I think the big thing that keeps me from saying that he's a full Pelagian is I'm pretty sure Leighton would say it is impossible for man to live a perfectly obedient life apart from grace. That was the big Pelagian controversy as far as I'm concerned, that Pelagius saw that he didn't need grace. Now, Leighton can correct me on this later, but I don't think you need grace in order to libertarianly choose to follow after Christ. Now, maybe he would say the grace is the gospel coming forth as a proclamation, but that kind of misses the point because we're talking about a specific grace needed in order to receive the gospel. This is where Arminians kind of see prevenient grace. And so we'd be close to the Arminians saying we are truly depraved and we do need God to act first. So there are nuances there. But thank you for that passage of Scripture. I want to thank you for all the super chats. And maybe I just want to remind everybody that I would really like to do apologetics full time. And so pretty soon I'm going to be updating my website, theapologeticdog.com. It's going to have a lot of cool features, got a lot of ideas and projects, but I'm also beginning the campaign to just raise support. I love serving at 12.5 Church. We are a church plant, and so things are limited around there. And my church family has really rallied around me to say, hey, we want to help you out the best we can so that you can continue to do apologetics. I just want people to know my heart, firstly, is obviously to serve Christ and to give God all the glory. But I also want to do apologetics that benefits the covenant members of 12.5 Church. And what's cool is they want me to put this content online so it can benefit other saints as well. And so if you're looking to support the Apologetic Dog ministry in ways of also in prayer and beyond, these are kind of the big three things that I see that you can... Oh, thank you, Paul Day. These are the three, and then I'll get to a fourth way that you can support the ministry is becoming a member on YouTube or Patreon. And I primarily utilize that to answer your questions. And I do that in about 20 or 30 minutes. And so Super Chats, those are fun. I love the questions or the comments, but just y'all supporting me with Super Chats, incredible. And so Paul Day says, and don't forget about that merch. And so I list the merchandise link on my YouTube channel, but I will be posting that more, especially here on YouTube, as we do have Apologetic Dog merch. And so that is a way that goes directly to the Apologetic Dog Ministry Fund. And one cool announcement I guess I can share with y'all is I will have a booth at G3 this year. That costs some money. So when you do support, it goes to things like me being able to travel. I don't have this elaborate travel fund like Dr. White has in an RV, but the apologetic pound. Let's see here. We got to figure out a good name for when me, you, and the pup we all travel. The pack. How about that? The apologetic dog pack. We do hit the road, and so Mama Dog. She's been traveling with me more and doing trips. And so I just want to thank you all so much for your ongoing support. And so y'all have a wonderful rest of the evening. I will see you all next time.